Welcome to this first walkthrough through the slides. Roland and myself are trying to give you the opportunity to be kind of a fly on the wall while we discuss the slides we are going to use for each session in the program. So whenever we start the program, we go through the whole flow, discuss how many sessions we have overall, like 9 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever we have. Then we briefly take a look at the whole outline of the course that we start with setting the stage. Then we're talking about Johari window, boundaries. Most topics are quite set. And then we are getting more and more flexible when it comes to changing topics, moving topics, but more about that later on. So that is the broad overview. And what we're trying to achieve with these videos is that we, again, basically give you the chance to be a fly on the wall and observe the discussion that we have before each session. So before we run a specific session in a specific week, what we are going to do is we are going to go through the slides one by one so that we know exactly what we're going to do, so that we know exactly what is going to happen in a particular course and whether there are changes that we need to do to adapt to the specific group we are working with. So it's basically a preparation for us. What we are going to do is we are going to share the slides in the way we are going to discuss them. So we basically do screen share. Roland is sitting in Vienna, I sit in Berlin. So we do this virtually all the time as we do the class mostly. This course is mostly conducted online. And that's basically the idea. So we're going to start discussing shortly and show you the slides. And that's about it. I would say, Roland, unless I've forgotten anything, but that's the idea. Isn't it?
Yeah, that's the idea. That's fine. Let's go ahead.
Let's talk about the specific start, which is called setting the stage. This is basically the first time when we're going to meet the students. We mostly have done this course with non-HR students, which means that students are not familiar with these kind of topics. Usually they are technical oriented people, they're IT people. They usually are not used, very broadly speaking, to deeply reflect about themselves, to reflect the dynamics interpersonally. So we need to bring them in gradually. And there is usually quite some excitement about the course, in a positive way, but also potentially anxiety in a negative way, because they don't know what is going to happen. And one student said, this is the toughest class he has ever taken because it was so difficult to discuss about these topics. So let's dive in, Roland. That was the speed meeting that we had planned to start the session so that the people are eased into it. 3 rounds, 7 minutes takes some time, and time is always tight, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And still, it's important to give the people an opportunity for warming. So this has rather the background, not so much about important data, but much more about getting to know each other and have some warming before we are turning into a more confrontative mode of teaching.
Yeah. Confrontative means we are basically trying to be a mirror for the students. So if they see us, if we react to what they're doing, if we do our interventions, they see in a very sharp clarity what is going on. And that is sometimes something that they don't like, what they see in the mirror, and we will get back to that. We said 7 plus 7 plus 7 minutes. Technically, you can reduce this time, like 6 minutes, but I wouldn't do less, Roland. I don't know what your opinion about that is. We have 3 people, trios, backout trios. So less than 6 minutes, probably not a good idea.
No, because people don't know each other at all. So they are really starting at a clean table, let's say. And to give them a little bit of a chance to get an idea who the other two are.
Yeah.
You need some minutes. And when you talk, the time is really flying.
Yeah. Plus, we have these two questions: who and where are you? I mean, feel free to adapt that. If you look at this video now, and all of these students are in the US, in China, in India, wherever. But nevertheless, if it's online, it's still nice to know where are people, and it gives them the chance to talk a little bit about their place, and the place in the group is quite an important topic later on. And so these are two questions that we like. The second one is more kind of a fun question. So what would you not tell your employer about yourself in the first month? And that is helping students to open up a bit more. And that's kind of a preparation for the next week. So the second video that we're going to create, when we talk about the Johari windows, where it is about reducing the unknown area for the others. But what I think, the questions are optional. People can adjust them if they want to, if they think other questions are relevant. I would not ask more than 2 questions. And then there's the plenary. I don't know if there is anything important to say, Roland, when we get back. So we put them into breakouts pretty fast. We don't discuss a lot in between, hoping that they cross-pollinate ideas. So ideally, it's 3 people, 3 people, 3 people, makes 9 people, 8 people that they meet. Ideally, never really works out. And then in the plenary, we basically simulate what we do later on. And very often there is silence. And we tend to sit with it, don't we?
Yeah, we do. And the plenary has always a certain amount of, let's say, anxiety with it. Oh. Because within the trios, it's much easier to overlook the other's facial expressions and to overlook the other's reaction of whatever I say. The moment I'm in the plenary and I see a lot of tiles there with the rather small impressions of the faces, then this doesn't work anymore. There is no overview, and this immediately sparks a certain feeling of being lost, not knowing what one's sentences, what one's words are doing with the others. So the plenary always has a large capacity for anxiety. And in the beginning, we are already dipping a little bit our toes into the water and doing a little bit of, let's say, disruption and doing a little bit of telling people what we are going to do, which is most of the time, let's say, unusual because it's not the normal, let's say, culture you have in work-based meetings.
Yeah. So I recently heard someone saying about another program that this is counterculture, the program. And I think we are also kind of counterculture with this Interpersonal Dynamics course, because usually a professor is standing in front of the students telling them what to do and what to remember. Students try to memorize everything and then they do their exam. What we are basically trying to do is we are asking them, who are you? How do you relate to others? And that is usually taking people aback, and it's provoking a lot of anxiety. So in the first meeting, my impression is that we are lecturing more than usual, so that we're setting the stage, what you said, Roland, in a way. So we are lecturing more, telling them what we're going to do, with the idea to reduce anxiety, which is more or less successful. Potentially less. There are always people that we lose. Let's see. All right. Anything more to add to this slide, Roland? I think pretty clear.
Oh, I don't think so. I think that's all we have with the slide.
So, like we said, feel free to adapt the questions, whatever you think makes sense. Feel free to reduce the time. We would recommend not to reduce it too much. And after the speed meeting, we are going to lecture a little bit. telling them what this is all about. And by the way, we are trying to give you the slides to upload them in a way that is possible, because there are sometimes pictures on the slides. You will see them on the next slides. And so we don't have the license to distribute them, to give them to you basically, but you will see them and you can easily change the slides or adjust them to your needs, even if the original pictures that we are showing you are not on there. So we basically tell them what it is all about. And the idea is to develop awareness. And Roland and I, we had a discussion before we actually started this recording about a situation where someone did something in a system. So the person is in an organization, which is a system for us, doing something. And these actions have ripple effects into the system. And it might be possible to develop awareness about what is going on in systems and what is going on inside of myself. So what am I doing to the system and what is the system doing to me? To develop this awareness, we think that we need a deep personal connection. And to do that, we are creating a sandbox. We are avoiding the word safe space. Sometimes this comes up with students that they want to have a safe space to explore things. And I understand the idea, but a safe space would be too passive for me. I know it's a controversial topic, or might be a controversial topic. For me, it's more kind of a sandbox. And I remember, Roland, we discussed this quite extensively, how we should call it.
Yeah, well, you see, if you call something a safe space, you assume that everybody has the same idea of being safe, which is basically an illusion.
Yeah.
And the sandbox at least makes it a more open, addresses it more openly, especially with the thought in the back of your head that whatever you do will offend somebody.
Yeah.
And maybe will delight in the same moment somebody else. So it's difficult, and that's what all this feedback is about. But don't forget that the concept feedback as such can be confrontative for some people depending on the culture. So if it's not a feedback culture, especially not a feedback culture regarding authorities and their, for example, participants, like we have in our trainings, then you have, the moment you start this thing, you have confronted some people, you have made some people uncomfortable, maybe especially because people are not used to have a feedback culture in their working environment.
And that's why I like the word sandbox. I always tell people, look, it's like you're on the beach and you're building your sand castles, and they're more or less beautiful and more or less sophisticated, but there might be the possibility that someone walks by and stomps over your sandcastle. It might also be possible that the sandcastle is just being washed away by the tide. So this is the idea. And the discussion that we are having right now might be a discussion that we have with the students about this particular thing. The risky thing is that we are discussing too much and that we are getting too involved in a rational discussion about the points that are on the slides. If students are anxious about what is going on, and a lot of them potentially are, because this kind of work is quite new to them, they might try to seduce you out of your role and try to involve you in rationalizing things, which is a defense against the task anxiety. And what we constantly try to do is to balance this dance between giving input and easing the pain a little bit, but not getting sucked into the dynamic and not getting seduced out of role from particular students. And that is one of the reasons why I like to do this type of work in a team, because sometimes I get sucked in and Roland pulls me out. Sometimes Roland gets pulled in and I have to pull him out, which basically means that we need a lot of trust when we the other person out, that we understand, hey, something is going on there. So I deeply trust Roland if he makes a comment or puts me off track that something is going on, and to be aware about what is he seeing that I'm not seeing at that point, for example.
Yeah, and an important point is because Jürgen, you used the word role and being pulled out of the role. So what is our role, or how do we define our role? And we define our role as facilitators that help the participants to do work.
Yeah.
And if we start doing work, then there is something wrong. Then we are pulled out of our role.
Yes. Yes. Doing the work and making sense of what is going on. Sometimes we help them to see what is going on, to make sense. But like Roland said, if you have the impression that you are working harder than the group, something is usually going wrong. Again, it is tremendously helpful to do this work together, or at least to have someone afterwards to reflect what you have done, to get an idea what kind of dynamics you were sucked in, because it is, I would say that it is 100% certain that you will get sucked into the dynamic because you are part of the dynamic. So it is impossible to stay out of the system. The tricky thing is to be on the boundary all the time, to be with the students, but not too much. That would be collusion. But also not to be too far outside and detached from the students. So it's basically riding this small line on the boundary with the very realistic chance that you will trip to one side or the other once in a while. And that's not a problem. It's just happening. And then it is important to make sense of this. And again, this is just easier to do it together. I hope, Roland, we are not frustrating the people who have to do this on their own, because I know you did another format for quite some years on your own. So it is possible, but it's just harder. I also did this course on my own. It is possible, but it's just much, much, much harder.
Yeah.
So it's a lot about reflection. What we are doing right now, while we discuss, we reflect, we connect ideas. And I already mentioned that. How is the impact of the students on others? And how is the impact of others on a particular student? So what is a student doing to the group, and what is the group doing to a student? Scapegoating, for example, is something that is quite likely to happen in a lot of groups. So groups are incapable to deal with their own stuff. So they split it off, project it onto one student, and then they think they get rid of it. Splitting is another thing that is quite likely to happen. So there are those students who are very vocal and those who are very quiet. And very often the quiet ones get labeled as the bad ones, or not the active students, which is probably leading to a discussion about that. There will be a lot of feelings that are coming up. And also, that is quite unusual for some students. And Roland raised the question of culture, also for certain cultures, to openly talk about feelings in front of others in a professional environment. So first of all, the tricky thing is to realize I'm feeling something, and then to put this into words, and then to give it as a data point to the group. What is helpful, and Roland, I don't know if we have it in the course specifically, is to help them by giving them a wheel of emotions. There are, if you Google for wheel of emotions, you will see a lot of graphics, and we encourage students to have this with them to figure out, okay, what kind of thing am I feeling? What is the word for what is going on in my feeling? And that needs inquiry, curiosity, contrary to performance. Very often, again, counterculture, students come to a class with the idea, I have to perform, which means I have to figure out what the professor wants from me to give him exactly what he wants from me. But that's obviously a lot of fantasy. If I start to assume as a student what you, the professor, might want from me, without even talking about it, there is a lot of fantasy, and that's usually leading to problems. And they want to perform, they want to be good students very often. And that is creating anxiety and stiffness and a feeling of incompetency. If you manage to bring them into a stance of inquiry and curiosity, they can't be incompetent, because curiosity brings you into a learning stance. And in our system, the German-Austrian system, we need to write exams. I don't know how this is in your particular institution, but we always tell them, learn from the process. That is a perfect exam. We encourage them to journal after each session, and then they have to write a reflection. We will talk about this on another slide. And then they should not worry too much about that. Still, they do. And that's basically what it's all about. Roland, any other thoughts?
Yeah, one important thought. Whatever you do, it's always a position, a value system. And so we are operating out of a specific value system. Never forget that.
Yeah.
There is no way in not doing action without transporting a value system. And this is also another fact. There is no way of not colliding with other value systems, especially with value systems, for example, that are working with taboos or that are working with not speaking out. So feedback culture is a sort of culture that is used to speak out about own feelings, about feelings I assume the others have, about my own fantasies, about fantasies I assume the others have. And this is a certain way of interact. And there are other ways. And there is no way around conflicts regarding those different approaches.
Roland, by saying value system, you mean like cultural different value systems, let's say country-wise culture, but also organizational culture?
No, but our culture. We have a value system by saying, do feedback. That's already that's not neutral. That's already something that has a certain value system, a certain thought model behind.
So you mean our particular individual value system that we have?
Individual, and by doing this facilitation, we do. The facilitation as such is not a neutral thing. It does transport a certain system of values, ideas, how to communicate, a certain idea of human beings, a certain idea of social systems. And there are other ideas out there that have their good reasons for not doing feedback like we do, for not talking in the plenary like we do, for doing things different. And that's one of the challenges you always will face.
Yes.
You also will face the challenge, why would it be better to operate in the system we are showing our students in comparison to the system the students are coming from and are maybe used to.
Yeah. And maybe kind of a little disclaimer, the work that we're doing with this course is, or will most likely lead to situations where students question authority. You could say they're empowered, but in a way that can be quite annoying for an authority figure. And we are in the role of an authority figure. And I sometimes realize, hey, I want them to be independent, but I don't want them to be independent, which is a very strange thing to figure out on my own. So what it is all about, developing awareness, is also true for me in this particular case. And you might not have seen it yet, but it might come out throughout other videos. Roland and I sometimes have a very different view of things, like how to approach things. So if we speak about value systems, our value systems sometimes are also, I would call it complementary, because they're sometimes very different, which is amazing because it gives us the chance to explore the value system of the other person. And if we disagree in front of the students, we consider that interesting and valuable because students realize that even authority figures can disagree, and authority figures can be wrong, whatever that means. They can mistakes, and that allows them to argue with each other, to make mistakes as well. But again, speaking about the value system that we are talking about, I know that there are other value systems that would say, as authority figures, never disagree in front of the people. And in this particular context, I would totally agree. But here we decided that it is a chance for learning. If that is happening, it's enriching the learning opportunity. All right. Maybe one thing that is very much related to it is the next aspect. It's called the here and now versus the there and then. What we're basically doing is we use the course in the moment where we meet, the here and the now, to reflect what is going on right now, here in this moment. What we try to avoid is talk about the there and then. There and then means a student starts talking about an experience they have made a year ago in their company when they were working as a student in this particular company. That might be interesting for this particular student and they might be learning in it, but it is not interesting for the rest of the group because we are trying to really use the dynamic, the data, which means behavior, that is happening right now. And it's sometimes tricky to hold people in the here and now because running away into the there and then is kind of a defense mechanism. So keeping them in the here and now, from my point of view, is especially important in the beginning because then they learn how to do it. If we let this slip and if we let them talk a lot about the there and then and start to change that later on throughout the semester, it is getting problematic. By the way, when I say semester, that's a course that you can also use outside of the university context from my point of view, but that's another discussion we can have somewhere. So that would be the main distinction from the here and now and the there and then from my point of view, Roland. But it's a super important point. Is there anything else that you would say it is important for those who are not tremendously familiar with that? Because it's a central thing.
Well, the one thing I would add is never underestimate how difficult it is to focus on the here and now if you are not in a profession that does it on an everyday basis. Yeah. So you are very used to it. But most of the time, our students are not very used to be in the here and now. So it sounds easy, but it is not.
Yeah. And if you now listen to us and you get kind of a little bit confused potentially, imagine how confused your students will be when we talk about this. So we have to role model that in a way. So that's a very central theme in a way. Roland, I'm thinking if we should talk about this a little bit more, but I don't know what to add that would be of any value. I think might be interesting I think we have to do it. We can't talk about the here and now and the there and then.
Yeah, and as a message, if you want to provide a course like that, you need really, really to train your own abilities to be in the here and now. Yeah. And the more you're used to that concept, the easier it will be for you to conduct a course like that.
Yeah. Sometimes people call the here and now presence. So to be very present, to focus on yourself, what is going on right now for you, what are the emotions that you have, just to be present with the students and then start from there picking up data points. For example, one data point is I recently experienced that, let's use the there and then to explain the here and now. I was in a group and the question was, who is taking notes? So there were 5 people. The question was, who is taking notes? and someone from the group volunteered someone else, which means the person said, looking at someone else, oh, you should take the notes. And the person said, no, my handwriting is not very good. Please feel free and you take the notes. And the other person said, no, my handwriting is worse than yours. You should take the notes. And then the person said, well, I'm sorry, but I don't want to compete with you on who has the worse handwriting. And that was a very fast interaction between two people that is usually slipping attention, that is considered as unproductive because it's the process and there is no solution behind it. But if you observe this among a group of students, these are valuable data points. And at that point, we would probably say in a course, oh, wait, stop, time out. Let's see what just happened. And usually students will look at you and say, what do you mean, what just happened? They haven't even realized what was going on. And then you say, well, let's focus on the question we just had, who is taking notes? What happened? And then we try to help students to dissect the process that person A asked person B to take notes, that person B replied to person A, that person A replied back, and that there was this back and forth. So you somehow, it is helpful if you can hold this like kind of a video recording type of thing in your head, like you said this, then you said that. And very often students will say, yeah, that's true, I agree. Or even if the two of them don't remember, someone else from the group will remember and say, yeah, I heard that as well. And then it is super important that you do not judge. It is not like you did something bad because you tried to volunteer the other person. Instead of, hey, let's play with it. That was phenomenal data. Thank you very much for providing it. Data is never good or bad. Data is just our thinking that makes it good or bad, our value system that makes it good or bad, and use it to make sense of what is going on. Because if students learn to understand the concept of volunteering someone else, which is a kind of a strange concept, I'm volunteering Roland to do something. Of course, it's not voluntary for Roland. Then they will be sensitive for it if it happens in another context. So this is a learning nugget that you can distill from the here and now, and the course is full of these learning nuggets. It is, however, tricky to tell you what kind of learning nuggets exactly, because we don't know what is going to happen in your here and now. So when you conduct it, things will pop up, and this is part of the excitement, for me at least, for this course. I find it phenomenal because you never know what is going to happen. If you are someone who likes very predictable teaching, I'm sorry to tell you this 30 minutes into the recording, this way of work is potentially not your way of working. But this is the data, this is the here and now that we're using based on a very recent specific example. That's the here and now, Roland, isn't it?
Yeah, basically, yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, so the next slide is a slide that we use, but just to give you the context. You will probably not use it, but we will talk about it because this particular course is embedded into a broader course system, and we are not going to go tremendously deep into it. So usually we have two parts of the semester. First of all, we have students as an individual, and these are 9 to 12 sessions. In this semester it were 9 sessions plus a lot of self-study, and that was purely online. So we made very positive experiences to run this particular course online. It's amazing. Don't run it hybrid. I wouldn't run the course if I have to run it hybrid. In person it is possible, but time restrictions are even more difficult if you do it in person, because in Zoom, that's the system that we usually use, you can put people into breakouts within the blink of an eye. If you are on a campus or together in a physical space, you need to factor in time to bring people to a breakout room and back. And usually time is super tight in these 90 minutes sessions. It is impossible to do this on campus. I did it once and it felt more clumsy, honestly. And then there is the second part of the course that we are not covering here at all. That might be an upcoming thing. And this is only on campus and hybrid. You can do it. You can run it in 3 formats. You can run it completely online, which is not my preferred version of doing it. On campus is my preferred version of doing it. Hybrid is okay, it's a necessity, but that makes it very, very complicated. And we're not going into the details here. Just to give you the broader idea that basically what we're doing here now is basically the introduction into the rest of the work. So we are laying the groundwork so that students can embark from this course, which is especially important because they are, like we said in the beginning, usually not familiar with this type of work. Yeah, I would say, Roland, just we're skipping it because that's just context and not content. This is a slide that I like to have. While I see now, potentially we would discuss if we would need it in the next round. Just like this quote, madness in individuals is rare, in groups it is the norm. So it's kind of a fun quote, but reading it now, Roland, if we would do it next time, probably I would ask myself, should we keep it? Should we remove it? It's just a nice to have. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, it might depend on the structure or on the let's say personality of the group or the group personality of the group, if you will. It depends. It's a saying that might stir up something in people. If there is a lot of anxiety in the plenary, it might be not productive to use it. Yeah. If there is a little bit of boredom in the plenary because people are fleeing into their own thoughts and running away from the work, then it might be interesting to have some spark to spark up a little bit the process. So it depends. And it also depends, I think, on the circumstances. If the circumstances, let's say, if recent news were very about uproars, about troubles, about protests, and maybe even casualties, then probably it's better not to use that slide because it connects too much to events that are discussed in real life and are really stirring up some strong anxieties. So you always have to pay attention. How is the mood within the group and how is the situation surrounding the whole time you are doing your course?
And that's what we now would discuss. Keep it or remove it, basically. And that's why it is important to prepare each and every session to see where is the group, what is the broader context saying, and so on and so forth. And by the way, Roland, I'm jumping now, but it might be an interesting thing. We will potentially talk about the unconscious later on. And we talked about the here and now just a couple of minutes ago, and about data points. Now bring the unconscious data points and the here and now together in one thing as an observation that I would probably not share with the group, but I would try to be aware of it. I try to keep it in mind is if you look at our video tiles, yours is using an abbreviation for your first name, using the last name. And I'm using my first name, not showing my last name. And of course, we haven't planned that. So it was an unconscious decision to write our names that way today for this particular video. And it might mean nothing. Like this quote, was it Freud? Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. It might also be a data point to reflect what is going on in this particular system right now. So what kind of message do we want to convey by doing it in a particular way. I wouldn't discuss it with students, but that's another example for an unconscious data point in the here and now.
Yes, and maybe a very important thing you mentioned, because so far we talked about the work the group has to do, the work the students have to do.
Yeah.
We did not talk about the work the staff has to do.
Yes.
And there is a lot of staff work to do that's different. And staff work is, for example, not to do work for the group, because that's what the group should do, and the staff should take care of that. But that does not mean that there is not staff work to do. And a lot of staff work is the reflection in the staff without the students. So closed doors, behind closed doors. Yeah. And this is an example, for example, where you can discuss actions of staff members and helping you finding clues about what's going on in the area of the unconscious. Yes. And hence because there are always resonance phenomena, so there is always resonance between the group of students and the team of staff. There might be very, very important data in some unconscious actions that, being reflected, can give the staff some ideas of next steps of interventions or for taking a decision, like we discussed about this slide, putting the slide in or leaving the slide out.
Yes. A tremendously important topic. Sometimes we talk about primary task, which is something that we are doing with the students. So we will show them this slide, we will do this exercise, this is timing for it, this is the sequence of it. That's the primary task we're doing. And staff work is sometimes called secondary task. And honestly, for me, staff work is super important, and it is immensely intense if you do it depending on how you do it. I mean, that is a very, very broad topic, and we don't know how familiar you are with this, but staff work, Roland, I'm grateful that you bring it up. That is tremendously important. And the two of us, we spend a lot of time. I would say in this particular course, we probably spend more time with staff work than we do with actually conducting the course. It is the preparation. And if I look at the timer now, we are discussing more than 40 minutes now about it. Of course, we're taking some detours that we would probably not do when we're doing it, but at least 30 minutes we need minimum to look at these things. Even more, I would say at least an hour to prepare the 90 minutes. Afterwards, at least like 15-30 minutes to do it. So we will probably spend at least as much time in staff work as we do working with the students. And if the group is let's say demanding, then it's even more. And I'm consciously saying demanding because I recently heard a nice quote: there is no such thing as a dysfunctional group, there is just a group. And the group is doing something, and we might label it dysfunctional, but that's not helpful. So be curious, what is going on with the group that you think is dysfunctional? Why are you labeling it as dysfunctional? So what is going on there? Staff work, super important. Roland, you said we are discussing behind closed doors. Sometimes we have something that is called open staff, and we might get back to that, which is the opposite of closed doors. But it is important that communication about the group is mainly happening within the group. And that is why we make this request to the student. Everything that has an impact on or affects the whole group shall be discussed in the plenary. I mean, honestly, a lot of students are talking offsite. They have their WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram groups where they are discussing. So be aware that there is another layer of communication aside of what is going on in the particular course. What we mean, and you can't avoid that. It's impossible. But what we mean by this is sometimes students approach us before the class, after the class, or in between breaks and have a question. And if they do this, we would encourage you to be very much on your toes, like, okay, are you addressed in the right role? And I have to talk about multiple roles in a couple of seconds. And is this something that should be discussed in the group because it belongs to the group and the student wants to take it out of the group for whatever reason? So we sometimes tell students that that's a very relevant thing that you're raising. Please bring it up in the group later on. So we're not discussing it with them, but they try to seduce us out of this role for various reasons. Speaking about roles and multiple roles, Roland, I remember in my university, I had the let's say, the added complexity. I was running the course, and at the same time, I held different positions in the system, which means I was also the head of the examination board or the program director for the study program, which led to confusion at times. Because in this course, I behave differently than I behave in my role as the head of the examination board as the program director for the study program. So I make it very explicit in the beginning what my role is, and that during this class, I can only be addressed in my role as a lecturer. Students cannot approach me if they have a question to me in the role of examination board. That is super important to avoid role confusion. And we make this very, very explicit in the beginning.
Yeah, that's a typical boundary problem.
Yeah.
So one, let's say, important facilitation rule is that you keep clear boundaries, especially regarding to your role. And that you always argue by telling the students, I'm now arguing out of my role so and so. And if there are different roles in the context of you and your students, it's sometimes really helpful to remind the students, because even if you yourself are clear about your boundaries, it might be of good help, especially didactically, if you tell the students, like Jürgen said, explicitly, well, now I'm talking in this and that role. And because of this and that role, the perspective is so and so.
Yeah. All right. Usually we are pretty fast with this slide. Students usually say, yeah, okay. And then we have to remind them if they try to break the boundary or step over the boundary, but that's basically about it. What I like is this particular thing. It's called violent politeness. And I try to explain to students that very often, if we look at this picture, we behave like this. We are violently polite, and that's a very weird thing for me, and it's kind of a paradox. But if you look at the table, it's like, I always joke, it's like a classic 1950s board meeting. So one guy is standing in front of the other, say, who is with me, who agrees, all in favor say I. And everyone says I, but what they think is, you bloody idiot. And so they're very polite on the surface, but below the surface, they are violent. And I always tell students, I don't know if I have been in the role of the guy standing in front of the others. I assume I have been a couple of times in my various roles, but I have to admit that I also have been in the role of one of the people sitting at the table. So looking at the person in front, say, very good idea, I'm with you, but leaving the meeting and saying, what an idiot, forget it. And if this is happening, that's a pretty bad thing. So we encourage people to figure out, what are they doing right now? Are they polite, and are they polite in a way that it is supportive, or are they using violence? Do they avoid something? Do they try to keep something from the people. So we basically tell them, don't be so polite, which is sometimes raising laughter among the students. But I think the message is quite clear. It makes people think. That's why I like this particular thing. And it's borrowed from an article, Why Work is Lonely, from the Harvard Business Review in 2014. So if you want to put it on the slide, that's probably one way to look, or where to look, and to get the license if you need it. That's about this, Roland. Also quite straightforward, usually not a lot of discussion about that. Yeah. Then we tell them, in some cultures, because we usually work with culturally very, very diverse groups, in some cultures I ask them, do you know the concept of losing face? Sometimes some people say, no, never heard about it. And some people say, oh yeah, I know about this. And then I tell them, for this course, you will forget it. You will forget the concept of losing face. It is not possible to lose your face here. It is tremendously helpful to keep this concept in mind if students or participants are in their particular culture, speaking of value systems, to remember there is a concept of losing face and not make people lose their face. But in this particular course that we are running, it would be tremendously limiting if people would hold themselves back and not speaking their truth. So they need to speak their truth, risking that someone is losing face. Sometimes it works. Sometimes people are so primed by their culture that they really have difficulties to lay that off. In some cultures, it is highly inappropriate to question the professor. So that's something that we are also working with, that students are there and basically what the professor says is like, that's the law. And we try to tell them, this is not the law. You can and you should be able to question us. But if they have spent like 25, 30, 35 years in another educational or cultural system, it is very hard to convince them that this is a good idea. And we will address that at the very end of the whole semester again. When we tell them, if you go home, just don't go rogue in the way that you spill your guts. But we will keep this for another session. All right. Then there's another thing. I also like this idea, the shame of learning. And I just tell students that if they learn, it is often associated with shame. Because if you learn, you realize, oh, I didn't know that before. And maybe you think you should have known. So every time you feel shame in learning, try to rephrase it, try to change the perspective towards, hey, wow, that's a learning opportunity for me here. So it's not a bad thing. Embrace that. Honestly, it's easier said than done. And maybe Roland mentioned, if you are used to do this work, you will know this concept. And I would say I'm very much used to do this work. And even I'm sometimes really grappling with that. It's not easy. And I have a lot of compassion for students who are grappling with it and are not capable to do that. Another similar thing is, Roland, please interrupt me, I'm now rushing through, similar to how I would rush through in the course, for example. The other thing is this one, never waste a good frustration. That's another quote I borrowed from someone. And I really like it because to me, it's what we are doing in this course is we are constantly challenging people. We are frustrating people. So our job is not to have happy customers who are leaving. If people would leave and would be tremendously happy every time they leave, we would probably not do our best job. It is quite likely that we sometimes frustrate people. And I always tell them, look, it's like a voodoo doll. Everyone seems to know voodoo dolls. And it's like we are putting a needle into you and it hurts. Or someone else is putting a needle into you and it hurts. And the first impulse is, if someone is putting a needle into you, to take the needle, to pull it out, throw it away and say, you bloody idiot. That's one way to deal with it. And it might be a healthy way. But if you do it that way, you will not learn. The invitation is that if you realize there is a needle that is sticking, hold on to it and follow the red thread that is attached to it, because this red thread will lead you to a pot of gold. That is where you can learn something. So if you get frustrated, you learn a lot about yourself. If you are capable and willing to accept this frustration and actually transfer it into learning. We try to support students doing that, but we are not able to, let's say, win over everyone. Just recently, there was a course where 3 students really were frustrated, and we were not capable, I was not capable to contain that frustration. So expect the unexpected, and make sure, depending on your position in your organization, that you have the backup of the organization to do this type of work. Also quite late to say that. I think we mentioned that early on in the course. So if you don't have the backup of the organization, be aware that there might be a backlash. And we know of colleagues who got pushed out of programs because the organization wasn't able to stand the level of frustration, the level of reflection that occurs when people suddenly see themselves very clearly in a mirror that we are trying to provide. So our invitation to learn might feel like an attack to some students, and you need to be prepared to that. Again, that's data. That's not dysfunctional. That's not problematic in the first place, but it can become a problem. So make sure you have the backup. And believe me, if you think you have the backup, it is not necessarily the case all the time. So beware if you do that type of work. Roland, very important disclaimer from my point of view.
Yeah, and you have always to check. There are totally different groups. One group can be far more resistant, the other group can be far more open, and you always have to check. You are not able to reach a certain level with every group. So
Yes.
you always have to consider, how far can I take this group? And it's probably more interesting to see the relative result than to see an absolute result. So the relative result would be, if the group is very resistant from the very beginning, it's still a success if you reach a certain step to openness. And even if it's not that openness you would have reached with another group that is more open, but relatively it might be the same size of step.
Yeah.
So don't get caught up in an absolute measurement.
Yeah.
Be really flexible to see the situation, the actual group, the group in the here and now, and the possible step you can do without harming either you or the staff or the group.
And speaking of harm, for us, if you have the chance that this course is voluntary, so that people sign up on a voluntary basis, that would be the ideal case from my point of view. What we also do, I'm not a huge fan of trigger warnings. They in the best case they don't do anything. In the worst case they make things worse. But we tell people, if you're having a hard time currently, go through a divorce or break up, or have issues in the family, or if you're in therapy at the moment, don't attend this course. Don't do it. Please postpone it. Sometimes we have people in the course who went through therapy, and in my experience, they add a depth of discussion that is priceless in a way, because they seem to be used to work in a different way. So don't panic if you have someone in the group who went through therapy. Very often those people are those who are really supportive in the work, because they understand this type of work. Speaking of what you want to achieve with the group, that's a very tricky thing, and I find myself sometimes thinking about, okay, I want to achieve certain things with the group, and that's too much desire in Bjorn's terms like memory and desire. I try not to have too much desire to bring a group to a certain stage. The group is where the group is and decides where they want to be. And I cannot make grass grow faster if I start pulling at it. So I have to nurture it and I have to be very, very patient. Maybe one last thing, speaking about therapy, we make it very clear that this is not therapy. It is not the place to do any therapeutic interventions, even if you're trained to do that. Therapy is a completely other thing. If students realize that it might be helpful to transfer them to therapy, they hopefully do. And we always have addresses available where they can get support if we think that is necessary. It is very rare. I think in 12 years, I transferred 1 or 2 people maybe, or I suggested that they see someone. But I would recommend, I don't know what your training is, stay away from therapy, which is a very broad topic to discuss that. But that is what we're making very explicit. This course is not therapy, even if students sometimes say, oh, it feels like that, but this is not the intention, to be very, very, very clear. Maybe one thing that we show for an online environment, and that's a quite important thing for us, that people have their camera on. I don't know about the culture in your organization, but in some places it is quite common that people turn off their camera in online meetings. And here, in one way, it is a data point, which is interesting to discuss, and at the same time, it is highly disruptive. That's why we are very normative with this. We tell them, keep the camera on. If the camera is not on, you are basically not here, because sometimes students are traveling, they're on the train, they're in their car, they're in the subway, and try to wing the course in a way, because it's just a talking course, and that is not helpful. It's, in one way, it's a confidentiality topic, which is an important thing that we raised during the contracting with the students, and it's just disruptive for the class. At the same time, it's a data point, so I have quite mixed feelings about that, but usually we tend to be quite normative about that, and we don't negotiate that with the students, because in the first session, usually negotiation doesn't really work. And that is something that we especially realize if we talk about this aspect. In our system, in our context, attendance is mandatory, so they have to be there 80% of the time. And we do a very precise calculation of the hours and say, this is the number of hours that you can miss. And we tried to negotiate what does missing mean in a 90-minute session. Like if you drop in 15 minutes late, does this already mean to miss the whole class? Does it mean you cannot participate, or you doesn't have any impact? The same is what happens if you leave 15 minutes earlier, and all these kind of things. And Roland, we tried to discuss it, which would be super interesting. And it basically led to a discussion that took us nearly 90 minutes sometimes. Plus it swapped into the other sessions afterwards. And very often students figured out a way to cheat on the system. That's how I would call it. So we decided to be quite normative there and say, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do. And depending on the decision we make, we would now negotiate between the two of us. Do we say 15 minutes and afterwards you're not getting admission anymore? Do we tell them if you are late, don't come at all? Or do we tell them like 90 minutes, 80% of 90 minutes is X minutes. After that, you will drop off in the beginning and at the end. Or the last thing, we in the next sessions, we do something that is called overnight thoughts. And we cannot really plan the duration of these overnight thoughts. And we start every session with overnight thoughts. We will talk about this in other videos. We sometimes tell them, if you come after the overnight thoughts, you don't get into the class, which is very easy online. We just don't allow them to enter the room. But if you make it within the overnight thoughts, you get admission. which is making it a bit more unpredictable for the students, because sometimes overnight thoughts take 2 minutes, sometimes they take 20 minutes. So depending on what you would prefer, these are basically the options that you have. I would not negotiate it with students currently. Maybe I will change my mind next year. I don't know, Roland, if is there any recommendation that you would say, okay, this is the preferred best option from your point of view?
No recommendation about the preferred option. You just decide the option, but a clear warning, whatever you decide to set up as rules, be sure to be able to execute those rules.
Absolutely.
So what comes with it, the more complex, the higher the complexity of your rules, the more administrative workload you will have.
Yes.
And sometimes if you don't take, if you are not aware of that, you set up interesting rules that might have some, let's say, at least useful structure, but it might not be, you might not be able to administrate the whole thing. So really always think about the administrative load you get with this, and always think about how you are able to execute the rule that you set up. And never ever set up a rule you are not able to execute, because this will have some backlash on the whole, on how the course runs.
And I remember a couple of backlashes, Roland, that we experienced.
Yes.
And I mean, when we set up the rule, we thought, oh, that's a pretty good idea, or hey, it's not so complicated. Let's do it that way. And then within the process, we realized, damn it, it's now there is a backlash now. But on the other hand, that's the kind of dynamic we talked about at the beginning of this video. Then you can make sense of it. Whatever happens, and try to make sense of it and work with it. The system is telling you something if there is a backlash. So what we tell students, never waste a good frustration, is also true for us. So super important point, absolutely. So then in our world again, and we are approaching the end slowly, is that we're talking about the exam. So that is how the exam looks like in our system. We tell them there is an attendance threshold, 80%, and only if they have attended 80%, they are allowed to take the exam, which is the paper. And the paper is a reflection about a situation that has happened in class, and they are reflecting it. It should be 1,500 words plus minus 10%, because you have to read all that. And then there is a deadline that we usually publish on Moodle. I don't know what kind of system you are using. Maybe, and that works well for us, I would say. Sometimes we set attendance also gives you points, so just be there, and the paper is also giving you some points, so we divided it in a way. In this particular class, we said there is an attendance threshold, so you need to have 80%, and then the paper is 100 points. That is usually the measurement that we are using. 0 to 100. 100 is a straight A. 1.0 in our world. You can try to figure out what is working best for you, but again, be careful. The more sophisticated you make it, the less students will understand it. And what we usually do is we show them the attendance rules, and then on Moodle we have a spreadsheet where the exact amount of hours is being calculated. And even that was problematic because you have to keep in mind for the next round that you have this spreadsheet online already. So be careful where you communicate what. If you start communicating different things, you will be lost for sometimes. Students will realize that, and they will use it. Speaking of AI, Roland, I don't know what your experience is, but we have read hundreds of reflections, and I never saw an AI created one in the last year. I mean, before that, obviously, but I haven't seen an AI created one.
Yeah, I think what we do is we are connecting the whole writing to the here and now the students have experienced. And this connection makes it impossible to construct something else. So the students need to take a situation out of the actual experience they had within the course. And in having this rule, there is no way to make something up, because all of us were in the session. So if a student takes out a certain circumstance, we both as lecturers can remember that. And first of all, this helps the students to connect the here and now to a reflection. And second, it helps us to keep AI at bay. We don't say students are not allowed to use AI to, let's say, to make their text better in ways of grammar or writing mistakes. But we say they shall not use AI for setting something up. But the connection between the real happening and the text is, I think, key here in this concept.
Sometimes students ask us, what does a good reflection look like? And we have a little audio about that we usually distribute. So what does it look like for us? A good reflection basically is very personal. It is related to an experience in the class. It is a deep reflection about different perspectives. There's a paper, it's called, I don't remember the author right away, it's called The Interpretative Stance. And the basic idea is that you can see the same situation from different perspectives. You can interpret it differently. And we want to see this in a reflection. So we basically talk a little bit about that, but we try not to make it too extensive in class, because that would consume too much time. And it's a way of dealing with task anxiety. So if students start to talk about requirements for the exam, it's task anxiety. And it's understandable, but it's not helpful to discuss this in the course in a way. So I would put all this information on Moodle or whatever system you are using and tell people, let's go and check this out. That's one thing. The other thing is, sometimes they say, can I write about a situation outside of the class? And we tell them, no. Why would you avoid grappling with a topic here? Don't write about a topic outside of the class, because no one can relate to it. And we want them to specifically reflect something that we can remember and assess differently. And the other thing students sometimes ask is, can I write about multiple situations in class? And I find that a tricky thing, because 1,500 words is roughly 3 pages A4, which is not that much. So how much can you cover when you split 3 pages into 2 pages? And I'm wondering, is this kind of a task avoidance? And that is something that I tell students exactly that way. So I wouldn't say no, but I'm highly skeptical. And if I say I'm highly skeptical, but I wouldn't say no, students usually consider this as a direct demand to do just one thing, which is good. And the reflections, speaking of groups that we think are difficult or are not so far and stuff we discussed, every time I read the reflections, maybe there is 1 or 2 exceptions, but mostly the reflections that I have read over the last years they really have touched me. Unbelievable. Even students when you leave the class and you think, that was weird, I don't know if this person has taken away anything from the class, they are writing reflection where I say, wow. Sometimes there are students in class that they're very reflective and they're participating tremendously well, and then the reflection is not very good, but you see all of that. But reflection for us is the best thing to conduct the exam. It doesn't make sense to write a classic exam. However, we provide a lot of reading before the class. So that's what they have to do. That's the exam, mostly. Now we're getting towards the end, and there are 2 different ways to do that. One is Miro, and that's another one. So again, 20 minutes, be careful. You realize we're talking over an hour now, and we will not obviously not do this in class. We try to keep the discussion part or the intro part very, very short. We would see this in the other videos for this course. Like short means roughly 20 minutes, but we will take a look in the detailed time breakdown that we haven't done for this particular video. So 20 minutes is something that Roland and I would adjust on the fly. Could be 15 minutes potentially, but usually not 25. So trios again, what is your experience in groups so far? What do you like? What annoys you? What do you bring into a group? Technically, you could do this in the beginning as well, but that would be a very deep dive. So the start that we have presented you is much softer from our point of view. And now we are bringing the people deeper into the work, already telling them what would you like to share with the large group from your discussion. And another option is a Miro board that you can either do at this point, or you can do it a little bit earlier on, and you can add this one. It depends a little bit about what your preference is and what you do. I like the Miro board, and we are going to show it in an addition to this one, and we will going to show it to you after the last slide, just so that we don't have to swap back and forth. So at the end of every session, we recommend that people do individual journaling after class based on these 3 questions. What did you observe about the group process? Just describe it. What feelings did you have about what happened or what did not happen? Another interesting question for me is, what were missed opportunities and why was it important to miss them? And what are you curious about? So just that they sit after each class, and we tell them 5 minutes are probably enough. They will do 10 minutes anyhow. If they do 5 minutes, they will stay with it and do 10 minutes probably. And at the end, we tell them, if you do this thoroughly, you basically have to condense this, and this will be your exam at the end. And that is concluding the class. That is basically it. Again, before we get into Miro, let's take a look at one other thing. Roland mentioned the staff work earlier on, that we have to do staff work and figure out what is going on. And we call this after action reviews sometimes, and that is one after action review. I want to show you real quick. So it's very raw. We just punch it in after the session so that we can take a look at it before the next session to remember where the group is. Technically, it is possible to hold them in mind, but it's in another way, it's not possible because we have so much on our plate. We need this reminder in a way. It's kind of a learning and digestive thing, kind of journaling for us as well. So in this particular class, we said 90 minutes was okay, but we did 50 minutes in the last breakout room. Remember what I said? Could be 20 minutes, could be 50 minutes. And then we had 3 minutes left for the open space, which is not a lot, but we have this problem very, very often. And 3 minutes open space, it's not really open space. It's like, let's do a quick checkout. And a quick checkout, we sometimes do just one word. And then we go through the line and they say one word. Or sometimes we say, we are counting down to 3 and you make a gesture about how you feel. We freeze in the gesture and then we close the meeting. That is the fastest way. So we count down to 1, 2, or 3, 2, 1. Then we do the gesture. We hold it. Everyone takes a look around. And then I say thank you and we're closing the meeting. We always start on the minute and we end on the minute. This is a boundary thing. And this is extremely important for the students so that the whole thing is being contained. Don't break the time boundaries. Don't run over time. If you end earlier, that's also a data point. If you run over time, that's a data point. I remember one quote, if the time boundary is being broken, something else is going on. And what is going on? These are the questions for the staff work later on. So timing here. Then Miro board. At that point, we said we haven't had enough time. It happened too fast, and switch to the breakout room was too fast. Either wait till after breakout rooms or assign 10 minutes time. Beware of timing. So that's the message to ourselves as well. The other thought we played with at that point in time was, should we do the warm up in the second session? What did we do there? To warm up in the plenary in session 2, wrap up the plenary. You see it's full of mistakes. We just punch it down here. Do the NTL swimming pool exercise. Ask people before to send their avatar as a picture. So it's very raw, very, very drafty, and it's been quite some time, so that's why I can't recollect it. So it's an okay-ish after action review. We didn't do a fantastic job here because we never thought that we would share it. But still, let's take a look at the Miro board. Roland, does it make sense if we conclude it now, the slides?
It does make sense. After action review is very important, even if you do it roughly and you don't really care about grammar and so forth. But it's very important, first of all, to have some ideas the next time you open it up, because time goes by, you forget things, you mix up things, you have different courses, and maybe your memory then brings in a memory of a different course, and then with the after action review you still have a sort of lighting tower where you can hold on and say, okay, this was the thing when we left, and these were our thoughts, and now it's easier to remember what happened and to make the next move for the next run of the course. Yeah. And the gesture is not, just to be sure, it's a gesture every individual chooses on her or his own. It's not a gesture we do like that everyone does the same one. Just to make that sure.
All right, so let's dive into Miro. We use Miro, whatever you use, just to have a virtual board where people can put up things. And I'm going to share you one example of the swimming pool exercise. And the basic question is, you have heard all this now. You might have realized it's a slightly different course that you're used to. So how deep do you want to jump into the water, like as a metaphor? And here is let me share it. Here is the Miro board that we are using. And that is the overview that you're getting. And basically this is the task, so to speak. And we ask them before to upload an avatar to this page. So they get it before the first round. And avatars are the ones that you can see here. I will talk about this in a second. So we kindly ask you to choose and upload your personal avatar to the Miro board. You can find with the link below before the next session. Also, please add your name to the avatar and group the two objects so that they can be moved together, which is kind of a technical challenge sometimes. So every time before we run the course, we check the Miro board if all the avatars are there and if the name and the avatar is grouped together so that people can move them right away. If these are two different objects, we group them together. And if people haven't added their avatar, we still add their name to the board. Very, very, very important. So there is some time. Please plan the time ahead of each session if you need to prepare something or if there is communication in between the sessions. So my avatar, so I gave them an example, is already online. Roland also gave an example. Avatars can be found, for example, here or any other site, whatever they want to do. So here you can see the avatars, and we took out the names. But let's see if this one is being grouped. You see this one is not being grouped. So the T and the cat is not being grouped, and that's how we group it now. And now you can move it. That is the idea. And what you see here is we have used, we've just taken a picture of a pool. And we said, we usually tell them, look, this is a pool and you can decide how deep you want to get into the water. You can either stay in the shallow area or you can jump right into the deep, into the unknown where it is cold, where you probably can't stand anymore and where you have to swim a little bit. Or if you want to, you can lounge around. You can say, okay, I'm neither going to the shallow end, not going to the deep end. We can just lounge around. And some students decided that they would be on the lounge area. This student has placed himself completely away from the others, which is again a very interesting data point for us that we could probably, that was probably done without that the student is aware of doing that, but it's a data point. So I would try to observe in a way what is going on with this particular student in the group, and I still remember him. So he was kind of an outlier, kind of an outsider the whole time, and that is kind of an indication for that. So the others threw themselves in, and the interesting thing is, that's also something we tell students. You can basically remind people that they said in the first session they want to jump right into the deep. How come that they do not participate in the group discussion? So you can encourage people to remind other people to do that. I would not remind a student and say, hey, you have decided to go very, very deep. Why are you not participating? I wouldn't do that. But you can encourage people to constantly look at that if they are wondering if someone's still there or not. Several people are lounging here as well. And it is great from my point of view that they are telling everyone, hey, I want to lounge first. I don't want to get in right away. And I appreciate that they are very, very clear about it. It is not bad that they want to lounge. It is not the requirement that everyone is in the deepest part of the pool, obviously. We also tell people that they can change their avatar over the time of the course. We just ask that they tell us in the group that they have changed it and what they have changed. So that's the exercise. It takes some time, as you realize. I like it. Feel free to take any picture that you want. Miro is just one way to do it. There are other ways to do it. Choose your preferred version. And that's about the first session, I would say, Roland. Correct?
Yeah, that is it. Mm-hmm.
That was longer than expected. Nearly 90 minutes that we talked about the 90-minute session. But on the other hand, that's exactly what we said. So we spend a lot of time thinking about these things. And I would now feel more or less very well prepared to run the session again. If you're doing it once a year or twice a year, it is highly recommended that you constantly do it. So this is the way that we are going to show you what we are doing, to give you a walkthrough. I think the technical part is one side, so primary task, the timing and all these things. The other tricky thing is, how ready do you feel to do this work? Because it's not just organizing breakout rooms and asking questions that are on slides. It's really about holding the space, making sense of the here and now in the moment. And that is usually not the traditional way of teaching, which is why I like this way of teaching, because it's not the traditional way. But I also find it very, very demanding, stressful, demanding, painful. So you really need to know what you're up to, I would say. All right. Roland, any concluding remarks? Anything that I forgot before?
I think this was a very, very exhaustive dive into our slides, and I think that's fine.
All right.
That's round.
So we will put up the slides in the course as well. Maybe not in the way you saw them, because we cannot share the pictures or most of the pictures with you, but you will easily find others. Maybe we will change the slides a little bit, but you get the idea, and then it's good anyhow to work on the slides yourself, to immerse yourself in the work a little bit. So thank you for bearing with us, roughly 90 minutes. Quite a long time. And then we will see you in the next videos if you are interested in the whole picture of it. See you next time.